There it is. We are live. Welcome, everybody. It is Thursday, October 13th, 2022, and we are here for the Backdrop CMS bi-weekly outreach meeting. My name is Luke McCormick. I'm a web project manager in San Ramon, California. And I will leave my introduction to there. Why don't we go to Greg?
Hi, I'm Greg. I'm joining from Melbourne, where it is Friday, 14th of October. And I've been in a sort of like a hiatus or a sabbatical for many months, and I'm trying to catch up with the community. I unsuccessfully tried to log in and attend the meetings last week, but computer issues. But yeah, hoping to contribute any way that I can. Really excited about upcoming events, Backdrop Live, and then Drupal South in Australia as well, in Brisbane. So yeah, and with that, I'll pass it on to Sarvashri.
Okay, my name is Sarvashri. I'm in Walnut Cove, North Carolina, and I'm really a beginner, but I'm looking at getting more beginners involved in Backdrop because I think it's going to be a good, or is a good already, good system for new people to do more advanced websites than that they couldn't do otherwise. So let's see, how about Jen?
Hello, Jen Lampton joining from Oakland, California. So excited about Bad Camp last week. It went amazing. Very happy to have Tim here, and I'm excited to talk about potential outreach changes. That Tim had some good ideas about how to handle those. So looking forward to that. Let's see, Martin.
Hi, I'm Martin. I'm in the United Kingdom, Northeast England. And I'm a web developer and contributor to Backdrop. We'll go to Tim.
Hello, my name is Tim Erickson. I'm St. Paul Tim on the internet. I don't live in St. Paul anymore, though. I'm in Deerwood, Minnesota, where the leaves are really beautiful. I should show my window. And yeah, I just came back from Bad Camp, which was really exciting and invigorating. I've got a lot of energy right now. So from that experience, I need to go to, I'm now that I've tasted the road again, I'm going to have to spend more time on the road, but probably not for a few months, given how late it is. Was that everybody?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, Jen alluded to one of the things we'd want to talk about a little bit today at Bad Camp. Luke and I had some conversations, and Irina was there about sort of alterations to how we're doing our marketing and outreach. But let's come back to that later, because I think the really important stuff right now that we have to get, we really need to talk about a couple of things. First of all, Jen, why don't you say just a little bit more about Bad Camp?
Sure.
Like why it was so wonderful.
Yeah. So we had a back summit. It was only 3 hours. It was from 9 to noon on the second day. But even though it was short, I felt like it was really valuable for people who were already familiar to Backdrop to hear other people talk about their experience with Backdrop. And in particular, we had Zach Chandler from Stanford and Eric Tupin from Atten Design both give little presentations on their recent work with Backdrop. And Zach did a whole bunch of stuff from sort of a business perspective on the kind of cost savings that you are going to get. And Atten did a really compelling presentation that I hadn't seen before. They specifically talked about their confidence in their ability to estimate Drupal 9 upgrades and the reality of what it looked like to do it in Backdrop instead. And they're seeing massive cost savings everywhere, not only in terms of the upgrade itself, but in terms of ongoing maintenance, which is stuff that we had sort of imagined for Backdrop and talked about a lot in theory. And it's so validating to see that playing out in practice. So I think for like Nate and Tim and I, we were all just really impressed by the kind of numbers they were throwing out and the kinds of savings people are actually seeing by moving to Backdrop. And then there were other people in the room who had committed to Backdrop a long time ago, hadn't been around for a while. This is Kevin in particular who gave a talk later in the afternoon. And so he was already sold on Backdrop. And when we were giving our presentations, whether it was Zach or Eric or Nate and I just sort of doing an intro to Backdrop, he was still collecting information about things that we had done in the last few years or things that he didn't know that we did the last time he was part of the community. And he's just saying, every time you guys say something, it's just a stronger argument for why Backdrop is the right choice for our group. And that was really interesting coming from him because he's also a huge fan of Drupal and the future of Drupal and where Drupal is going. And he just still couldn't justify the amount of money it would take in order for his organization to move to newer versions of Drupal. And he gave a talk to that end a little bit later in the afternoon, and he was talking about sort of the journey that they've had so far to try and get off of Drupal 7 and hearing the real world explanation of like what organizations are facing in this Drupal end of life and hearing how Backdrop might be a great solution for them was just really I don't know, it's validating to hear that all of the stuff that we've been working on is compelling to people who are really struggling with their own futures. So that was the thing that I got the most out of it.
So, yeah, it was absolutely. So there were two present. First of all, Bad Camp was much smaller. It was only about 150 people. So this was a much smaller camp than Bad Camp has been in the past. But it was also a very, a fun, intimate, I enjoyed it a lot. There were only 2 tracks of sessions with, 3 blocks in the morning and 3 in the afternoon for 2 days. So, that's only 12 blocks with 24 total sessions. 2 of those, not counting not counting the
Summit.
The summit. Irina gave a presentation where she just sort of casually talked about working on research-related websites, and she talked about both Backdrop and what's the other one? Drupal. Yeah, I forget. It's both Backdrop and Drupal. Like here's why we did Drupal on this site. Here's why we did Backdrop and loved it on this site. And I think she spent probably as much time on Backdrop as Drupal, but it wasn't like Jen talking about Backdrop, right? It was just about somebody from the community talking about how Backdrop is incorporated in their work. And then Kevin gave his presentation, which also was about Backdrop and Drupal, but half of it was like rah, 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 Backdrop, how great it is. But then he also, I love Drupal as well. And I want to work on Drupal, and it's great for some of our sites, but it's not great for all of them. And we got a lot of sites that we don't need Drupal 9 for. So, and then so if you count Kevin, Irina, and then also like Atten, we had like 3 presenters there at Bad Camp talking about how great Backdrop is, none of whom are like day-to-day active in our community, right? So that was really cool.
Was there a lot more people online? In other words, could people get into the Bad Camp online or not?
No, there was no live or online participation. It was purely face-to-face. So they're gonna look at that, I think, next year. But so it didn't reach huge numbers. The sessions were recorded. So Kevin's, hopefully, assuming that there weren't any problems, my understanding is Kevin and Irina's sessions were recorded and hopefully will be available soon, and we'll share links to them. The summit was not recorded. So, but most of the content in the summit has been recorded at other times. So. Anyways, so I think that's really the big news from Bad Camp. It was great for me to meet Luke, I think, in person for the first time.
I think so. As hard as that is to believe.
And certainly Irina was definitely the first time I've met Irina in person. So, and get to see Kevin. I think we should really quickly add that Kevin, for those who don't follow, he worked at the University of Colorado. He researched using Backdrop for about a year. For the University of Colorado for at least hundreds, if not thousands of sites. His team recommended Backdrop. The administration chose not to go with Backdrop. Kevin and his team all left. They still haven't made final decisions on what to do with these 777 sites. Kevin is back at the university after a couple of years hiatus, and he's working on some Drupal 7 or 9, 10 sites that, as he said in his presentation, he's really happy working on Drupal for those sites, but he still thinks that they should adopt Backdrop for a lot of the other smaller sites. And he went away from Bandcamp with a sort of a reinvigorated determination to make that pitch. I mean, I think that was why he gave his presentation, is because he's going to try to remake the pitch to the University of Colorado. And a side note for Jen, a guy named Tim, what was his name? Do you remember, Martin? Came to
Stalker.
What?
Tim Stalker.
Shocker, yeah. Came to office hours yesterday, and he works at the University of Colorado as well in Denver, and is friends or neighbors with Kevin. So he was referring to Kevin, and he was there asking a bunch of questions about Backdrop for the University of Colorado, Denver. So
That's
anyways,
great.
I assume that Kevin's activity might have spurred him to be there.
Was Kevin at Denver too, or was it a different university,
It's
Colorado?
a Boulder.
Yeah,
See Boulder.
Kevin's at Boulder.
Yeah, was Kevin the person that wore this T-shirt in one Drupal event that said, "Convince me that it's a good idea to convert 1,000 Drupal sites to 9"?
Yep, that was Kevin. In fact, he wore that shirt in his presentation at Bandcamp, or a copy of it. I don't know if it was the original or if he made a new one, but
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so there's that. So we have a little bit of momentum coming out of Bandcamp. That was kind of exciting. We should be thinking about how to leverage all of that.
I also had a couple of people ask me, where can I come to learn more about Backdrop? And it was fantastic to be able to say, come to Backdrop in 2 weeks. So I know we were a little bit worried about these two events happening really close together, but I thought that it's been very helpful to keep momentum for people who are like, oh, I can do that, because 2 weeks is far enough away that you're not exhausted, like if it was the next week, but it's also close enough that people haven't forgotten yet. So I really have found a lot of value in driving people to the Backdrop event immediately after the Bandcamp event. And I expect we'll see some registrations from that too.
Yeah, in retrospect, and maybe we can circle around this next year, we really could have been pushing Backdrop Live more at Bandcamp. We could have had like signs and flyers, or some kind of indication about it. But oh well.
We should have had stickers. We should have had Backdrop Live stickers to give out.
We should have had Luke consulting ahead of time. We would have thought about it.
Luke's made a commitment here. We'll talk about it in a minute.
You know what they say? The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Second best time is today.
Okay. I heard that same analogy yesterday. Okay, so if nobody has anything else on Bandcamp, I think we have a couple of other important things to talk about. One is Backdrop Live, and Jen just alluded to that. So we are at, quick report, 19 registrations. I would say a little behind where I hoped we would be at this time, but not in awful shape. We'll see how things go. I just got out a newsletter yesterday, very delayed. Usually we have a month out, we have a newsletter, and we're just doing it a week and a half ahead. Probably do one more next week, just to reinforce that. Although truthfully, I'm not convinced that we get a lot of, based on experience, that we're getting a lot of registrations based on newsletters. I'm surprised, because we're sending it out to 2,000 people. Usually after I send it out, there's a couple of people. Now, I don't know how many people read the newsletter and then sign up a week later, but it isn't like there's a surge on the day of the newsletter, normally. And so I'm not sure that that's even our most effective means of communicating. I've been hitting Twitter, I think, pretty good. I noticed Martin's been doing a good job on LinkedIn. I did get something up on Facebook. Luke, if you can help us get a little more on Facebook, I think that would be good.
Yeah, John Seward also put something on Facebook, and looks like he's kind of on that to some extent.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, he's been. I don't know if I know him personally, but I've seen him on Facebook talking about Backdrop a lot, so that's good.
To
Go
the
ahead.
effectiveness of the newsletter, I'm one of those people that sort of like adds it as a reminder and I do it later. So I wouldn't be sort of like discouraged by the fact that people didn't do it the day that it went out.
Yeah, that's all fair. And, and the basic premise of advertising is you have to see a message multiple times, sometimes before you act. So
Exactly. Yep.
having the newsletter as one means is good. And I think if we do another one next week, we'll probably see more of a last minute surge based on that second one than we did on the first. The schedule I was a little bit concerned about, but in the last couple of days have really started to fill out some, which I think is important. I mean, as an unconference, people can nominate sessions at the last minute, but I think in terms of outreach and getting people to sign up, having things on the schedule is really helpful. And up until this week, our schedule was pretty thin, but it's really started to fill out in a way that I think now if somebody looks at it, they have a good idea. And I know we'll get more sessions at the last minute. So I'm no longer too worried about the schedule, but I still would love for people to get more things on the schedule if you have ideas. I don't know, Jen, if you saw this, but I went and invited, I went back to the Zulip. Jen and I had a meeting with the Zulip product manager a month or two ago to talk a little bit about ideas. And it just occurred to me, let's bring them to Backdrop Live and have them talk a little bit about Zulip. And then also it's a chance for us to talk about it if there are things we can do better, just in the way we've, like should we change the way we're doing streams or anything like that. So the project manager for Zulip has agreed to come and will be participating with us in the session. Did we get anybody for the Pantheon session? Anybody specific yet, or?
I reached out to both. I was like, I am muted. Just to be muted. I reached out to both Matt and Greg Anderson to ask if either of them would be available in the time that I scheduled the session. I haven't heard back from either of them yet, but I was hoping that Matt might forward that to the developer advocate group and see if any of them might drop in. And Greg, I know, has been really supportive and helpful to us in the past, so I thought it would be nice if he was there. He was at our summit at PodCamp last week too. So
Sure.
we'll see.
So the Pantheon developer advocate was at BatCamp. We probably should have.
There was one. Yeah, Taryn was there, but they have a whole group under marketing that does developer relations, the DevRel group.
So I saw a
Matt's in
comment
that too.
somewhere. I saw a comment somewhere. I think it was in Zulip that they're planning. You know how our long-term pet peeve with Pantheon is that we are not sort of like the top tier when you start creating. And there was talk about adding us there. Was that any progress, or do I recall it wrong?
I don't think there's been any progress there. It's sort of a marketing team decision in order to do that. And marketing is just looking at like, where are they making the most dollars? And so that's Drupal WordPress. That's where they're getting it from. But I do think that Pantheon is facing some internal pressure from some of their customers coming from Stanford. Now Stanford's on there, and also CU Boulder moved to Pantheon in the last few years, where they haven't moved to Drupal 8. They have started moving their infrastructure to Pantheon. And so they're also putting a lot of pressure on Pantheon for Backdrop support. And I think that if Pantheon gets enough internal pressure, that might change them faster than just waiting for the numbers to show them that there's making enough income for that. And I think the kinds of changes that we would see would not necessarily Backdrop being immediately added to the install WordPress, Drupal, or Backdrop, but it would be the language on the page. Instead of being like install Drupal or WordPress, it would stay like install a CMS of your choice or something like that, to make it a little bit more agnostic. But I don't actually know how much active development is happening on Pantheon's dashboard. They seem to be very invested in other newer ideas that most people don't care about except for Pantheon. So I don't really know what they're doing, but that does seem to be where they're putting all of their energy.
Right.
Yeah.
A big step.
Two points that I want to make. Sorry, Tim.
Yeah.
Just on this. One is that with there's a in the upcoming Drupal South, my company is gonna announce a lot of new products, and one of them is hosting.
Okay.
And more on that after that event. But it might be on the expensive side. I don't have a lot of information yet, but
Sure.
yeah. And the other one was that what you just said, Jen, is that a typical chicken and egg thing. Like they're waiting for the numbers to come, but if it doesn't show prominently somewhere, numbers won't come. So yeah. Anyways, that's what I want to say. Sorry, Tim. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, the point I was just going to make, something, I think Kevin might have raised this, is that one big win at Pantheon would just be getting it so that if somebody goes to support and asks a backdrop question, that people don't sort of tell them that they don't support backdrop, which I think has happened, even though because it's like it's been unclear internally whether or not they support backdrop, because sort of technically they do, but officially they don't. And like, so even if they don't do anything on the website, if we could just make it so that the support it responds better when they get these questions. And I think that's one of the things Kevin's really working for. Both at Backdrop Live, both Kevin and Irina were really, both of them personally and for the project, feel like they're pushing Pantheon to do more. And again, I think that's nice that it's not Jen and Nate or us, but it's other people in the community that are pushing for it. And my idea of doing something on Pantheon at Backdrop Live was, again, just to provide that bottom up pressure, right? Where it's not us like coming to them and asking them to do more. It's more us sort of just showing that there's interest and hopefully getting them talking about it and maybe doing something. So anyways, the other thing I'm going to mention, because it's very much outreach related, is I don't know those of you who saw, that's related to Backdrop Live, those of you who saw, so Amy June Hinlin works for opensource.com now, and she asked me to write an article about Zulip and our community's use of Zulip for opensource.com 4 or 5 months ago now. They have pretty wide readership. We're often talking about how do we get exposure in other channels. And at the time, my feeling was that this is a good opportunity for us not just to write about Backdrop, but to write about things that are Backdrop adjacent, just to build awareness, and things that are specifically Backdrop. And I intended to follow that up with more articles. I haven't yet, but it occurred to me to invite Amy June to Backdrop Live, and for us to, one, just talk about opensource.com as sort of a channel. Again, I like to sometimes have sort of content that isn't necessarily Backdrop specific, but also to talk about with her how we can use Backdrop, or we can use opensource.com and maybe writing some articles to get more exposure for Backdrop. And she's excited and interested in doing that. She has a possible scheduling conflict, so I put her on the schedule. We might have to cancel the official session, but if we do, then I think we'll invite her back to an outreach or marketing meeting in the future and just sort of brainstorm like what kinds of things would be appropriate content for opensource.com that would also serve our need of just generating more awareness about our existence. So any questions or thoughts on that? Okay.
Yeah, I'm in favor of exploring more as you said, either general open source projects, or like, for example, there's Linux Australia, and it's like a sort of like an umbrella thing that helps open source software that don't have either the budget or the time to sort of like organize things. Or there's events. I think there's one upcoming the next month or something. And there's also events like locally, at least, like higher ed conferences that we could get exposure on. It's just that I don't have the time or the energy. We need more people locally here. And as and if and when the Backdrop community grows here, maybe I can convince people to just sort of like start pitching us there. Yeah, but it's worth exploring, as you said. Yeah.
We're going to talk a little bit more about that marketing stuff in a little bit, but yeah, those are good points. I just had another thought that I forgot. Is there anything else? So that's where we're at sort of in terms of our schedule and our outreach. Is there anything else that anybody can, I want to encourage folks to invite folks, help spread the word. If you use social media, I'll try to help us get the word out. I did, actually a couple of interesting notes. One of which is I've been binging on the Talking Drupal podcast lately, which, by the way, has had some really good backdrop content from time to time, including an interview if anybody hasn't heard it. So Eric from Atten has done a number of recorded sessions, and a podcast, and they're really it's so great to hear somebody like from an agency out there just advocating for Backdrop, like saying, hey, our agency's behind it. And I highly recommend you listen to that stuff. But they have been advertising on Talking Drupal, like promote your Drupal camp on our site. And they say, just go to the website and let us know. Well, so I did that about 2 weeks ago. I went to the Talking Drupal website and said, hey, would you be willing to promote Backdrop Live? And I haven't heard anything back. So, which I'm inclined to think is not like a snub as much as it is maybe just an oversight or they're busy. Because, they've done enough Backdrop content. I kind of don't think they would snub us. But
are you talking specifically about that? Because I had some comms with them and they had sort of like an internal summit. So they were busy this week or still busy?
I'm talking about Talking Drupal.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I contacted the Talking Drupal people to see if they would promote Backdrop Live on their podcast.
Yeah, and similarly to that, I've noticed, because I've been participating in some webinars, and I've noticed this pattern because I'm not a marketing person, right? Where people write blog posts that are useful, like 80% of the blog post would be useful information. It wouldn't be marketing. And then at the very bottom, it's like, hey, if you want to discuss this more, contact us. Sure. Which is a pitch, right? And I find it good. And I used to see that in the form of blogs, but I now noticed, since I brought up Atten, that there's efforts from other people to do it in the form of webinars where they invite interested people and they give very useful information. And then only at the end, it's not sort of like all about the company that is doing the presentation, but at the end, it's like a pitch. And I was thinking that maybe we could do similar things.
Sure. Like
sort of like the office hour that we do, but more dedicated, I found it very useful. And the last thing, which is also related to that, is I've noticed that such blog posts are not only in posted in digital agency websites, but in hosting companies. So I've seen Hostinger and DreamHost, I think, articles about Drupal or WordPress. So what I'm saying is that they see opportunity to like, say there's a new release of WordPress. This is what I think brought me up to these things. And I was typing in Google, what's new with WordPress 6, right? And that brought me to these articles for these companies. So maybe it's time that we have a release. It's a good thing that if we get someone in these hosting companies to write an article about the new features or cross-link or something like that.
This is a great idea. And that's going to tie into the last segment of our meeting. But before we get there, on the posting announcements about Backdrop Live, I'm not sure quite how I ended up there, but I was on Drupal.org yesterday and realized that they have a calendar where you could just submit back Drupal camps. And I thought, well, we're in this whole Backdrop is family thing right now. We're invited to DrupalCon. Why not post Backdrop Live on Drupal.org? And first I sort of asked for some feedback in Zulip, like, does anybody think this is a bad idea? Nobody said yes. Some people, Irina said absolutely. And so then I just thought, well, I'll go back, and it turns out I assumed that it would have to get approved or something. Well, it didn't. I just created a listing for Backdrop Live, and we're on the Drupal.org events webpage right now. And, well, at least we were yesterday. Let's see if we're still there.
I didn't think it's a bad idea, but I thought that if we had an official blessing, sort of like would be run it. But
I think we do. I think our meeting with the DA was the official blessing we needed. Don't you, Jen? Or what do you think? Did you think I'm pushing it?
No, I think it's fine. And I think, if they really don't want all of this content, they'll just to turn them down. But I think
Yep.
that there's no harm in putting it out there, especially if it's coming from us, but it's also coming from Atten and it's coming from whoever else, Irina. They might start to see value with, like, maybe people in the conference want to hear about this. People in the conference want to talk about it. So
Bringing D.org to the point, I was looking at our group page in D.org, and most of the usual suspects are there, but we should run another campaign in Zulip or something, just a call out for people if they have a D.org profile and they're supporting Backdrop, they're regular contributors, or they feel that they're part of the project, they should add themselves in that.
I think
page.
you were, Greg, I think you were going to write a blog post on that at one time, and I don't know if we ever did. If there is one, we could just link to it in like Twitter. If there's not, to do a little blog post encouraging that would be something we could promote in social media.
I recall that in my company, they asked me to do a documentation on our onboarding process. So if you're a developer or a non-developer, you need to create an account if you don't have one, and then add yourself to the company. I recall that, but I don't remember. Did I promise that?
Well, we talked about it. I don't know if you promised it, but the idea came up that we should like do a blog post.
Yeah, it sounds like a good idea. It does sound like a good idea.
Great. So anyways, if there's anybody has other ideas of like calendars or places that we might get on get somebody to write, actually, like, well, so the Talking Drupal is one place I thought of that might do an announcement about Backdrop Live. Well, like I don't think opensource.com has a calendar, but if there were any open source event calendars that people knew of that we could get on, that would be good. Part of my, like, I went into the Zulip chat and said, hey, we're having this event. We'd love to have somebody from Zulip come and talk to us. And the side benefit of that was that I announced this event on the Zulip. So anybody can see it. It's not an official calendar or anything, but you never know if anybody will get interested in that. So if there's any other channels like that you can think of for last minute posts. But, this is where like a hosting company or something that really supported us, might actually do a blog post, but I don't at this stage. It's probably
back to that. If we ask them to do the blog post, it might be just work for them to do, and they might not have time or time allocation, right? And I've seen that affiliated people, or maybe like this is my question: how do we get one of us to have access to these? Like, how do we approach the hosting companies and say we can write that blog article, and then
Greg? Yeah, this isn't a new process. There's something called press releases, which you just write up a press release with content, and then you just send it out to a bunch of, and Sarvashri has helped us accumulate some lists of people we might send these to. And we haven't been using that list as well as we should, but to some extent, you just send them copy, and then they can just, who the Drupal
That sounds
Times.
that sounds like duplicate content. If they just copy and paste it sounds like duplicated content.
It's a time-honored tradition in publishing.
Oh, okay. This ties back to, again, from memory, I think either you, Martin, or Steve mentioned something about working, like having so close relations with a specific hosting provider. Maybe I'm just like in the UK. You're muted, by the way.
That would have been Steve, I think.
Steve, okay. All right.
We should really reach out to the Drop Times. They've been covering us a bit, and I think they're eager for content. So like if we gave them some content, they might actually do an article. That would be wonderful. This should be high priority. Here, have an events page.
Do we have any boilerplate for creating these kinds of documents?
We don't have one now, but we could.
Yeah, maybe
So-
creating a boilerplate database.
Okay,
Titles and copy.
I'm gonna try to get on the Drop Times. Let's take that as a transition. Your point, Sarvashri, maybe to our final. Does anybody else have anything else on Backdrop Live? Okay, so Sarvashri, the kind of thing you're talking about melds with our final topic today.
Good.
which is about, I don't know, it's probably about 6 months ago, we had a big blog, or we had a forum discussion about how to better do outreach. And we had like 60 or 70 posts. And I like summarized this all in a Google Doc. And then we had an outreach meeting. And during the outreach meeting, you know, I sort of advocated, well, we've got all these ideas. How can we better do better at implementing them? Because my concern is that I don't think we're short of ideas. I think we've been short at follow through. And so I tried to push the discussion in that direction. It didn't go, I don't think it went very well. But after the meeting, I thought more about it. And I made a proposal to a few people privately, but never publicly. We talked about it a little bit at Bad Camp, which is, so I'd like to make this proposal now, which is that I think part of my frustration with this meeting is that it's much more of a talking session that happens every 2 weeks. And it's not quite as action orientated as I'd like. And I think this isn't a committee. It's just a group of people that get together and talk about outreach every 2 weeks. And I think a committee would be a little bit more action focused. And so what I'd like to do, and again, I've talked to Jen and Irina and Luke about this, and they all seem to be on board, is to look at having more of a formal marketing committee that has membership of people who are committed to working on issues, and it has an agenda, and it sets some goals. And it might set a goal like we're going to do and that its meetings are a little more structured and I think separate from this time slot. And that we repurpose this time slot for something else, because I think, but that we would report back, you know, in this times. So one of my ideas was that this become, instead of an outreach meeting, it become a community meeting where we just talk about community stuff, and we could report on what the outreach community or the marketing committee is doing, but that this meeting would meet separately. Luke has volunteered to like chair this committee, which is a big thing. Does anybody have any thoughts on this idea?
I think it's a really great idea, because just like you have a developers meeting and you're working on things that you know need to be done, and people are moving forward on those things, this would be a comparable thing for marketing. Great.
None of the details have been ironed out, but my own vision for this is that it would be an open committee and that anybody could join, and that people might drop in and listen. You know, we might, I don't know, like I haven't decided whether or not we do YouTube streams of all these meetings or not, or how we handle that. But the point being is that it isn't a meeting where people just drop in and chat. It's like you join the committee, and when you join the committee, you're sort of signing on to the agenda of the committee and helping to get the work done. So that, you know, there's a little bit more of like an old business and a new business, which we're not good at this, right? We talk about a bunch of stuff this week, and then next week we talk about a bunch of other stuff. You know, I mean, it's sometimes a little bit better than that. But ideally in this committee, there would be like some specific goals that we're working to, and every meeting would be, okay, how are we progressing towards these goals? What have we got done in the last week? What needs to happen now? What's the blocker? How do we unblock people to get this stuff done?
Exactly.
So,
I think that's great. That's the way to move forward, I think.
All right. So if it was fully baked ahead of time, I would now have some sort of announcement like, oh, so here's what's going to happen. But serving more as a ribbon cutting, you know, we've just kind of like dug that first shovelful of soil in this case. I think the ball is unmistakably in my court to do something. So that's what will happen next. Is I'll throw out some proposals to try to coalesce this around some ideas. Nothing firm, nothing decided, but just sort of like, how about what if we built this sort of thing around? I could probably use at this point a deadline, just because that's very motivating. So why doesn't somebody throw out some time when I should have something like this by?
Is there such a thing as an online Gantt chart for tracking everything?
there is.
Yeah, that might be a useful tool.
Sure.
A Gantt chart for projects, who's doing it, when it starts, when it ends, that sort of thing. Something not too complicated.
Luke, in an earlier discussion, I think I suggested that we might try to have this committee meet before Backdrop Live. I think that's a little too ambitious right now. But I do think we could have a session at Backdrop Live and that you could have a proposal there, that would be your deadline, is to have.
Yeah, all right, as a firm thing, let's have something rolled out by Backdrop Live. I think that's probably a good organizing spectrum. And so no one will be surprised to see me, throwing out things before then with that as kind of a goal.
Well, if this is helpful to you, we could sort of set Wednesday before Backdrop Live for you to draft up a proposal on how you think this should all work and share it with people for feedback, so that going into Backdrop Live, you've at least already gotten some feedback. If that's helpful, I don't know if it's necessary.
No, that's really good. The Wednesday before Backdrop Live, that works for me.
That you try to have, and basically what I think we're looking for is for you to sort of draft up a proposal for how this committee will work.
Yeah.
And then at Backdrop Live, we can talk, well, first of all, we can get feedback to you before Backdrop Live, asynchronously. And on the day of Backdrop Live, we can talk about it, get more feedback. And then hopefully this committee will just start meeting, after Backdrop Live. What we do with this session then is the next big thing, which I don't know should be on Luke's shoulders, because that, again, my thought was that this just become a community meeting where it's not specifically outreach, but outreach things might come up. We could talk about anything community related. And we could do updates. I had this other brainstorm, which I don't know if we have time for. I'm going to throw it out there, which is that we call this the community meeting. Some of you saw me throw out the idea of a podcast, just kind of crazy. And I don't want to go too far down that road, but it occurred to me some people use these meetings sort of as a podcast. What if we turned this every other meeting into a recorded event that it's a little more informative and less discussion. So it starts out with, here's what's happened in the Backdrop community this week. Here are the new modules that are out or releases, things like that. And then maybe we actually do like some case studies. We invite people to do case studies or whatever. And I want to distinguish this from a podcast, and that I'm not expecting like real high production values, because I don't think we have the time for that. But we're publishing a recorded presentation every week or every 2 weeks right now in this time slot. And what if we did exactly the same thing, but made the content less us chatting about what we might do, and have it actually be more about the Backdrop community and
I love this idea. I couldn't hold it in any longer.
Yeah, good idea, Tim.
Yeah.
I like it.
I mean, there's a technological side to that too that's kind of handy. Is as a podcast, you can have the audio or even the video, show up in the various podcast feed things, so that it gets delivered rather than have to be hunted for.
Sure. I'm really nervous about getting too ambitious too quickly. I'd like for us, for step one, to just sort of change the format of what we're doing now. But then, as anybody has the initiative and the time, if they want to help get it onto a podcast platform, I'm all for that. But I don't want that to be a blocker, right? I don't want it we can't do it until we figured those problems out. But if people figure those out and want to address with those quickly, they could.
I've been wanting to do a podcast for 10 years, so I'm enthusiastic about the idea of somehow making that into a thing.
Well, that might mean that the marketing committee still has an influence in this, because maybe the marketing committee is sort of the producers of this event. They help set the schedule and come up with topics, or maybe not. Maybe that's separate. I don't know.
Yeah, well,
but somebody's going to have to put a little bit of planning into what the format each week is and what we'll talk about. I don't think it has to be a lot. It could be pretty minimal.
Well, we're having a marketing committee retreat in Aruba next week, so we can discuss it there.
Okay.
No, we're
Yeah,
not.
I was thinking that maybe this could be a light form until we have more content and more people. How I see this is the podcasts. I don't I don't listen to a lot of podcasts, but the ones that I listen to related to Backdrop is people were invited from different companies, like recently Atom, for example, right? And it was again in the format of explain why you chose Backdrop and what's your experience with it, and then plug either at the beginning or at the end. And since we had a lot of members of the community being interested in promoting the company, the business that they do with Backdrop, maybe inviting, and as I said, I think I threw that idea around, like the community highlights that we haven't been doing for years now.
Yeah.
Maybe that could
Yeah.
evolve to being, which is easier than writing, evolve to being a podcast. Invite one of the community members to,
Yeah.
to talk
Yeah.
about. That's a good start to, have some content.
By podcast, you mean a video podcast?
Yeah, I don't want to get hung up on the term podcast because I'm afraid that, I mean, to the extent that we're able to make it into a podcast, that's great. But for me, it's really just like what we're doing now, but in a more structured and informative, right? Like the output of the content is the same as what we're doing now, but the structure will be different and the content will be different, right? When I say the output is the same, I mean, the minimal viable product is a YouTube video every 2 weeks that looks just like this one, but it has different, more structured content.
Mhm.
And then if we get it onto podcast platforms, that's a win. But I'm really nervous about like trying to make this too I know somebody's going to step in and say, "Oh, I could do editing and I could do this," and like that just increases the overhead and it increases the chance of it failing. And like if we keep our expectations low and grow slowly, that's better. I think.
What has worked greatly is the releases and how we do it, because we have a process and a template and we follow the tasks. So just to have some failover and not to put stress on a single person or just a few people, if this is to happen regularly, we can have a free whatever topic for the first half of it or whatever, and then we can have a fixed set of questions that we ask for each person that is sort of like invited. And that should help at least get 50% of the load off of people, right?
Okay, I agree. I just want to reinforce too, Greg, your idea about like you highlighting community members. I think that would be a great possibility for this, doing case studies, but also doing something like a new module, just doing a quick demo on a new module or something.
It's a way
all of these are legitimate things.
Yeah.
And I think
It's
it
a way
also
of rewarding.
right. Yeah.
It's a way of rewarding contributions as well. So if you have a member that has been part of the community for a long time and they've been contributing either in documentation or just participating in issues, right? Just reviewing or testing patches, they should be given the opportunity, if they have a business that is backed by Backdrop, to promote it, right? And that's a good way to sort of like give back to them by allowing them to, giving them some prominence.
Well, we'll talk more about this later, but I think these are all viable ideas, and we'll have to figure out how to do that and sort of who's going to do the scheduling. But we're out of time. It's 4 o'clock. The developer meeting's supposed to start in a minute. I heard a lot of enthusiasm for both of these ideas, the new marketing committee and sort of switching this meeting into sort of a community meeting / I don't know. I feel like I want to use the word podcast because I don't know what else to use, but I don't want that word to inflate people's expectations.
Mhm.
Okay.
right.
Good. So we'll work on that, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that at Backdrop Live. So I think that's it. Why don't we wrap up this meeting and turn off the Zoom? Any final words, or bye, everybody?